All right, that's the end of our break. Let's continue with our work. Director, please continue. Paragraphs 11, 12, hazard assessment, nothing special. We can go to Annex 1. Members, we've completed the scrutiny of the 12 paragraphs in the main text. We can now move on to Annex 1. Director. No material change apart from this addition. Ecological and fisheries impact assessments. So the fisheries impact assessment will have to be conducted in the future. And then page 22 in the Chinese version, or page 19, we've made an addition. And then the public key viewpoint added to the next page. That means when considering visual impact, we consider the key public key viewpoints. There are also some drafting changes. Any questions, comments on Annex 1? Please continue. Annex 2. Again, minor drafting changes. No material change. So in the English version, and the proposed addition, modification, alteration, this phrase has been deleted. Because under the nature of the project, all the basic information is included. So the proposed addition, modification, alteration, these are all included under the nature of the project. Right, other minor changes. I see. Annex 2. Comments, questions? No. Director, Annex 3. There is one material change. In the English, it's biophysical. In the Chinese term, is called Mutlei. Now we've added chemical, physical, and biological environment. The original reads biophysical. We've made an improvement to this title. There are also some drafting changes. Annex 3, any comments? Any questions? No. Annex 4. You will see changes under air quality impact. We are deleting Part B. That is about total suspended particulate concentration. About construction dust emission, in other words. As explained before, we do not recommend construction dust emission modeling. You can introduce a mitigation measure by spraying water on dust emission. So we are deleting this part. In the consultation process, we also made the same suggestion. We did not receive any objection. Annex 4 is on air quality. So we can now turn to Annex 12, which correlates with Annex 4. Members, let's see if you have questions on Annex 4. If not, we can now turn to Annex 12. Page 44 in the English version. Page 44 contains mostly drafting changes. The material change comes under 2.1. 2.1 on page 44. For certain premises, places, they are not considered a sensitive receiver for people who only stay there on a transient basis, such as pedestrian walkway, cycle track, bus stop, etc. For premises in which exposure is transient in nature, they are excluded from the list of air-sensitive receivers. We have proposed this change and we have not received opposing comments from the public.
好，就翻返附件4。
Back to Annex 4. Sorry, still in Annex 12. Now the other amendments are about qualitative or quantitative assessments. Now, similar to Annex 4 about dust in construction sites. We have covered that already, so that's about it for Annex 12. So 3.6D, dust from construction sites. Yes, 3.6D, dust emission from a construction site. Now, as we have explained before, now actually with water spraying, the release of construction dust can be suppressed, so we don't have to conduct a quantitative dust emission assessment. Now, members, we haven't completed Annex 4 yet, but we have jumped to Annex 14 because it is also a guideline in relation to air quality assessments. So, do members have any questions or views on Annex 12? I just want to learn about this. Now, water spraying is sufficient. The quantitative air quality assessments will not be required. Now, what about the sample for random testing? Now, for RAT kits, for COVID, it is very easy. You can just do a test and find out the result. So, what about the sampling method for dust emission? Now, you can simply do a nose swab, and then with the RAT, you can know the result. So, what about the quantitative assessment for dust? Now, maybe you can do a controlled test in the controlled environments. Then with a laser equipment, you can measure the dust particulates in the air. Don't you have those tools? So you can simply set up a controlled environment. You don't have to go back to the lab to do the test, or even you can do a bare eye test. Thank you. Dr. Junius Ho is very savvy of the latest developments in technology. Now, in the past, you need to take dust samples for 24 hours, and then you have to take the samples to the laboratory for testing. Now, we have real-time assessments tool for air quality now. Now, the quantitative assessments pertain to the EIA process. That is before the work has started. We want to gauge the possible impact on the environment. Since we don't know what machineries will be used, so it would be difficult. So we propose replacing quantitative assessments with mitigation measures like water spraying and other measures to suppress release of construction dust, coupled with real-time monitoring tools to ensure that the dust level will not exceed the standard. So we are proposing to remove the quantitative assessment requirements. Completely agree. Since the work hasn't started yet and we don't know what machinery will be used, it's no point to conduct a quantitative assessment. And also, water spraying and other mitigation measures are in future tense. So in conducting EIA, you can only ask the project proponents to make an undertaking that certain mitigation measures will be implemented. Now, when you are applying for an EIA approval, you just have to promise me you will conduct random sampling on the air quality. So that's the promise we need. Now, as the EIA stage, there is no point asking the project's proponents to provide you with an air quality sample because the work hasn't started yet. Yes, at the work stage, we will have environmental monitoring for all EIA elements. At the beginning of the work, monitoring will be conducted. If it is found that there is a lot of dust, then we will ask the proponents to conduct some mitigation measures, say, for example, using canvas to cover the site. Like Dr. Junius Ho said, mitigation measures will be implemented at different stages, but it depends on the level of dust measured in real time. Depending on the situation, mitigation measures will be required, including water spraying. So when the environmental permit is issued and when work has begun, real-time monitoring will be in place to ensure that the standards are not exceeded. Yes, there will be different requirements at different stages. Dr. Junius Ho, any follow-up questions? No, I'm just thinking how we can disseminate this message more clearly in the text. Now we want to explain, we should tell the proponents that only mitigation measures like water spraying will be required. So I think it is a bit redundant when you say that construction dust assessments shall be conducted qualitatively to ensure blah, blah, blah. So I think that might be redundant. Well, actually, I myself think the way it is drafted is quite clear. Maybe I am more familiar with the requirements, but maybe laymen will have difficulties understanding it. Now it says effective construction dust control requirements, including but not limited to covering the dusty materials and keeping ground surface wet by water spraying to suppress the release of construction dust. Now, at the EIA stage, qualitative assessments and mitigation measures are needed, but quantitative assessments is not necessary. So I think it is quite clear. So are you replacing quantitative assessment with qualitative assessment? Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. If it is there, it is fine. Thank you. Any other views? So that's it for Annex 12. Going back to Annex 4. Chairman, actually, we have gone through Annex 4 as well because the changes are mostly textual. So the English version of Annex 4 is very clear, including Figure 1 risk guidelines. There isn't a lot of change. So if there are no questions, we have completed Annex 4. Now Annex 5. Annex 5. Sorry, just a moment, Director. Now about the air quality assessments and the guidelines in Annex 4. Were there any views from the public? There is none. They support the requirements that water spraying is enough. Dust emission modeling is not required. Annex 5. Page 25 in the English version. Now for the text, there aren't a lot of changes. Most changes are related to Table 1. Now we have deleted Kai Tak airports. We only have one airport in Hong Kong now. Now in the past, the requirements at Kai Tak airports was less stringent. So the entire Kai Tak airports column is deleted. And the other page, page 27 or page 26, we have removed offices as well. In the past, there was no air conditioning in offices. Now most offices have air conditioning, so we have removed the requirements in terms of noise control for offices. And Table 1B, we have added 3 items under the table, including places of public worship and also courts of law and hospitals. We have added the 70 decibels requirements. The other are just textual changes. Now, Table 2, page 30 in the English version, we have deleted the requirements for rail traffic. Now, in housing construction projects, there were requirements for using double-glazed windows or acoustic windows. So we only required the proponents to adopt these mitigation measures if other alternatives are not available. So now we have removed the requirements for rail traffic. So rail traffic is removed. So what if there is a building facing the railway? So what will be the noise standard for projects under the relevant laws? Now, under the Noise Control Ordinance, there is a dedicated chapter for controlling noise level, so we don't have to set up additional requirements under the EIA ordinance. So this is not required under EIA. However, under the relevant industrial ordinances, there are control. Actually, that is the Noise Control Ordinance. There will be law enforcement and control on noise from rail. Now, for EIA projects which may generate noise, say for example a rail project, there will still be a noise assessment. However, rail traffic is no longer considered there is no requirement for using for mitigating noise generated from rail to receptors. So that's it for Annex 5. Since we are at noise, let me take you to Annex 13. Annex 13, page 56 in the Chinese version. Now the major amendments are listed out on the PowerPoint. Now, points 5.3 and 5.4 about construction noise assessments. We propose to replace the quantitative assessment with a qualitative one. As we have explained in previously, very often low noise construction methods and equipments are used. So construction noise assessments is not required as the EIA stage. However, a qualitative assessment will have to be submitted when the EP has been issued. This is to ensure that the assessment is done in a more accurate and careful manner. So when a low noise construction method is implemented or adopted, the noise impact on the public will be much lower. So this is what we are proposing. Points 5.6 and 5.7. We have proposed new requirements for aircraft and helicopter noise. In civil aviation. Now this is upon the views submitted by the Director of Civil Aviation, and these are the corresponding changes according to his views. Now point 6, we have listed out effective noise mitigation measures, which will be effective on minimizing the noise impacts on residential housing by roadwork, including acoustic windows and also other measures, including acoustic balconies. Now concerning Annex 14, Annex 13, during the public consultation stage, we have not received any objecting views. Now, I have some questions about the inconsistency between Chinese and English. Now, you have added the word traffic in the Chinese text. However, in the English text, you only say rail noise. In the Chinese text, however, the full term is rail traffic noise. Now, in the English version, it is just rail noise. So what is the reasoning behind? Now, as we have said, we have considered the views from the civil division of the drafting of the law drafting of the DOJ. So please consider aligning the Chinese with the English text in future amendments. So for road, you have added the word traffic in the English version, so road traffic noise. So road, that is reasonable because road itself will not generate noise. So I think you can do the same for rail, but these are just minor issues. It will not affect the enforceability of the rules. So members, any more questions on Annex 13? Now, Director, please continue. Now going back to Annex 6, page 37 in the Chinese version and 31 in the English version. Now that is criteria for evaluating water pollution. Yes. Now there are major material changes to both Chinese and English text. Now, first of all, Annex 6. In Annex 6, now we are aligning the requirements concerning the impact on human health and also the impact on landscape. We are listing out the water quality objectives more clearly. Now, 1.2.1. Now we have deleted the clause not to cause tainting of seafood. Now we are not removing these requirements, but it should not be put under aesthetic enjoyment. So it is now subsumed under C, that is aquatic life. So there is a clause to prevent concentration of toxic substances from reaching unacceptable levels. So there are a lot of variations, including accumulation of toxic substances in the biomass and so on. So we are just shifting the requirements around, and say page 36. That is the maximize accumulation of substances in the species. So they have been subsumed under the topic accumulation of toxic substances and also sediments. Now in Part C, aquatic life, we have added the requirements not to change the characteristics of the water mass, including no change to the level of suspended matters in the water and temperature and so on. So there were some questions from the public why we are removing the requirements. I have to clarify that we are just making it more accurate.
就係一個
1.3. This has to do with the mixing zone criteria. It's a complex idea. You have a discharge. It comes out of an outlet. We drink fresh water. Fresh water is also used for showers. The water, once treated, is discharged deep under the sea. Fresh water is lighter than seawater, so it comes up. So now we have the primary dilution area. It takes 2 minutes for the treatment to happen, and then there's a subsequent dilution area. We apply different standards in different zones. So we are setting out the details here, the initial dilution zone and the subsequent dilution zone. In the initial dilution zone, now the toxic standards have to be met when it comes to the lead. In the subsequent dilution zone, standards have to be met when it comes to chronic diseases. And then this is an international practice. 1.3.2 bracket B. Now we're taking out must not endanger the route of migration. In the submission, we received some question this change. Now we're not removing this requirement about must not interfere with migratory pathways. We're simply moving it elsewhere. and ecologically sensitive site. So we're looking at not just the migratory pathways, but also the broader impact. They will be covered under the new bracket B. Say you have species in an area, they will be covered. So it's not like we're removing a requirement. Another change has to do with inorganic nitrogen. 1.3.2 bracket F, total inorganic nitrogen. We're spelling out that for the assessment, if it's at a high background level, it cannot exceed the annual average level by 30%, and that's widely adopted as a practice across the world. 1.4.1 water quality. The details are set up under 1.3. As for the other changes, 2.1. Discharge of wastewater and treated sewage effluent. So that's page 33. Ms. Elizabeth Quat. For 1.3.2a, it must not impair the integrity of the water body as a whole. What does it mean? For the water body, it has a certain purpose. Now we talk about the beneficial use in the TM. Now take Ngao Mei Hoi as an example, the hot shelter, the pot shelter in Sai Kung. We have to look at the use of the water body. There, it's used for a broad range of purposes. There are beaches, there are species, there are people doing windsurfing or rowing. So you can have many activities, many things happening at the water body. So there, if you have a discharge in the mixing zone, the discharge cannot affect all those activities going on. Ms. Quat, any follow-up? No? Director, please continue. 2.1. There's a long paragraph on what to do with the discharge. There's a table beneath the text 2.1.2, the background level. As I said, we are affected by the nitrogen from the Pearl River Delta. So in terms of inorganic nitrogen, the level is high in some parts of the area. For that reason, we have this requirement, a minimal level, the acceptable sewage treatment level. Say in Tolo Harbor and Channel and Deep Bay, if the background level fails to meet the requirement, then the secondary treatment applies, and then the nitrogen removal, phosphorus removal, and disinfection. In Europe and in the US, they have this requirement too. As for the other water control zones, phosphorus removal is not needed. It's just secondary treatment, nitrogen removal, and disinfection. The reason is that for Tolo Harbor, Channel, and Deep Bay, they are semi-closed water bodies. So red tides are more likely to happen, so we require phosphorus removal and nitrogen removal too. As for the other water control zones, secondary treatment, nitrogen removal, and disinfection, that will do. Now, dumping of waste. We spell out the matters there. 2.4 Toxic and prohibited substances. For treated effluent, it's discharged. It cannot affect the aquatic life. The effluent cannot contain toxic substances. And there cannot be accumulative substances. If we don't know how toxic the water is, then we have this new requirement. And this is the whole effluent toxicity criteria. So you put in living organisms to see if they die, if they are affected. We'll get the data. There are 2 acute toxic units and 1 chronic toxic unit. These are parameters adopted internationally. During the public consultation, we received comments in support of our proposal. Thank you, Chairman. On Annex 6, the Director has just walked us through the changes. Annexes 4 and 6 and 14 are related. They have to do with the impact of water discharge not going above the 30% of the limit. And at Annex 6, 2.1.1 and 2.1.2, the old TM has a broader scope, but the rules are not specific. With the proposed changes, things are spelled out clearly. Circumstances when the secondary treatment applies, and also the increase, or rather the cases involving eutrophication. So now with the clear rules, they're easier to enforce. And the Director has told us the submissions are mostly in support of these proposed changes, no objection. The changes this time are an improvement on the old version, what's possible and what's off the table. So members, any other comments or questions on Annex 6? No questions, no comments. So we are done with that part. Let's move on to Annex 7. Director, please continue. We should go to Annex 14. It's also on water pollution. So we will now move to Annex 14. Guidelines on water pollution. Annex 14. The changes mirror those under Annex 6. So they're based on changes in Annex 6. (2.1) D. We remove bracket D because they have to do with the ecosystem. And we will have a separate section devoted to that. There's a public submission on 4.3. 4.1, 4.2 will explain that. They correspond to the content in Annex 6. Under 4.3, though, there's a public submission wondering if we can apply the acute toxic unit and the chronic toxic unit to wastewater and treated sewage effluent. The submission wondered if we can apply the units to the stormwater. So whether we can apply that to the stormwater without a clear source, the answer is no. Because we have to look at the intensity of the rain, the volume of the stormwater. Based on these reasons, we cannot apply these units and apply the tests. So that suggestion cannot be done. Still, they support our proposed change. They're just wondering if we can go further, but we have explained why that won't work. (5.3) 5.4 consequential changes to Annex 6 during the public consultation. On the point in 5.6, some propose keeping 5.6, and this has to do with the biological effect. We're not removing that paragraph. Biological effect, it's about toxicity, accumulative toxicity. Those fall under the requirements of Annex 6. Now we also have the water quality objectives, and also we apply the acute toxic unit and the chronic toxic unit. That's covered under those areas. So we do not propose to cover them here. We're not removing the requirement. We're simply spelling out the requirement elsewhere. So water quality objectives under Annex 6. That's where the point about biological effect has already been dealt with, indeed. And we have covered that. Please continue. As for the rest, textual changes, no major changes. 6.5. We are taking out a large chunk of text, and this is the reason. The wastewater flows into the public sewerage. This is not for the EIA process. The impact is on the public sewerage. So there's a sewage impact assessment, because here it's about the impact on the public sewers. You have a separate mechanism for that, so we don't spell that out here. No public objection to the removal of this part. Moving on. 6.8. The new 6.8. We're spelling things out in greater detail. The whole toxic unit, the classification of toxic substances. That way, the public will get a clear picture as to what this part is about. Moving on. So that's basically this part, 6.10, 6.11. We spell things out in greater detail when surface runoff happens. So we have to take into account the non-point analysis, no major changes elsewhere. So that's it for the water quality changes. No objections in the public consultation. Many support our proposed changes because we're clarifying things here. Questions from members on Annex 6, assessments of water quality, and also Annex 14, the guidelines for assessing water pollution. No further questions. Please continue, Director. Annex 14 and 6 were done. So now let's move on to Annex 7. Waste management and the assessment.
嗰度咧，我哋
For Annex 7, we make reference to the Waste Disposal Ordinance and the subsidiary legislation made thereunder. We include these as criteria for assessment. We also propose textual changes. Well, Director, in the English version in Annex 7, these are all minor changes, but in the Chinese version, I see a redrafting of the annex. But any questions? No? After Annex 7, we should now turn to Annex 15. Annex 15 on page 57 in the English version. The major change comes under 3.1. We've made certain additions to tighten up the control. When leaving the construction site, dump trucks carrying construction waste will be transporting waste out of the construction sites. To step up control, we put in an extra requirement for the dump trucks to be equipped with real-time tracking and monitoring devices so that we have a clear idea where the waste is transported to and whether the waste would be disposed of at other places. 3.3. In relation to collection, disposal of waste, we have deleted requirements relating to potential hazards, air, noise, so on and so forth, because in relation to air, noise, water quality, we have included the requirements in the different respective chapters. So that's all for Annex 15. So the major change is an additional requirement for trucks to be equipped with real-time tracking and monitoring devices. Mr. Andrew Lam, I'm looking at 2.1c Annex 15. How do you deal with horses? The handling of horses? For horse manure? Okay, waste from livestock. Your question was what? Horse manure? Here, under livestock rearing. For livestock, we refer to animals that produce food for us. Under the relevant ordinance, horse is not included as a livestock. In Sandy Ridge, there is a dedicated spot for the composting of horse manure. So this is how the horse manure is handled. So in light of the circumstances in Hong Kong, if an animal is reared not for the purpose of consumption, it will not be included here. Not horses, not cattle. I'm not going to refer to the legislation on livestock rearing. I just want to confirm my understanding. So, say the Hong Kong Jockey Club keeps certain horses, and we're talking about EIA process here. If the Hong Kong Jockey Club then applies for certain facilities to be built on the premises to handle horse manure, this will be outside the scope of this TM. Is that right? We don't have any specific control over it, right? That's the present situation. So will EIA be required for such new facilities to be put in place? For horses, we're talking about a race course accommodating more than 10,000 persons. And in that circumstance, an EIA will be required. For other facilities relating to horses, no EIA will be required. Here, in conducting an EIA, we need to assess the waste management implications. We also need to consider the special requirements for waste disposal, and we consider the circumstances under which a lot of waste will be generated from livestock rearing. That is why we have this specific point here. So, stemming from Mr. Lam's question, if the Hong Kong Jockey Club or any organization wishes to set up a stable for horses in Hong Kong, it doesn't involve the number of spectators or the area or sizable area, and that means no EIA will be required for that proposed horse stable. Let me give you an example. Say it could be related to an activity like a circus performance or equestrian performance. And if a facility is required, there is no need to conduct an EIA. Is that right? Because here it refers to rearing. It doesn't spell out any time limit in relation to rearing. To supplement this answer given by the director, in deciding whether an EP or EIA will be required for the projects, you can refer to the schedule containing a list of designated projects. If it falls within scope, and if the project involves the rearing of a horse, then in terms of waste disposal from the perspective of an EIA, the handling of horse manure should be considered. But coming back to the schedule, we allow a number of exceptions. Here, for livestock rearing, we refer specifically to pigs, chickens, etc. Having regard to the fact that pig farms and chicken farms in Hong Kong do have a substantial impact as far as the odor or waste disposal are concerned. As for horses or cattle, the rearing of such animals should fall under the waste management implications assessments in an EIA. That is to say, if the project falls within the scope of designated projects, then an EIA should be conducted. Whereas in other circumstances, despite not having any set of guidelines applicable, the assessment should still be conducted because it affects whether an EP will be issued by the department. Any follow-up question? No, I think that as long as the administration is well aware of the means available to them, because we now have a university rearing cattle, there should be proper control. No, to avoid any accusation of preferential treatments for certain projects. Annex 15, any other comments, questions? Director, please continue. Next, we go back to Annex 8 about criteria for evaluating ecological impact. Page 37 in the English version. Ecological impact. In paragraph 1, we add the examples of direct, indirect changes such as light impact, loss of natural light. So it's not just about the extent of lighting, but also about whether there is a loss of natural light. This is in light of the public's request for light pollution assessment to be conducted. However, for light pollution in the urban areas is not within the remit of an EIA. We've added loss of natural light, however. And then we also have another addition under Table 1, regional significance. Simply put, an EIA may involve a very small region. And then, according to the assessment, there may be an impact on a certain species. And yet, if we take a broader perspective, this species can be found in other places in the region as well, such as the seahorse species in Long May Beach. And if we take a broader perspective, we find the existence of seahorses in all along Tolo Harbor. Same as other species as well, we need to consider a wider habitat. So if it is found that certain species will be affected, we will need to expand the scope of assessment and to find out the connectivity among different species. Again, in light of submissions received from the public, apart from native woodland, we also include secondary woodland. So we should also consider the relevant species in the secondary woodland. This is added in light of comments received from the public. We have not received any objection. So that's about Annex 8. Any questions on Annex 8? Annex 16, you'll find the corresponding changes, guidelines for ecological assessment. Ms. Carmen Can. About the addition of regional significance, I'd like to say that this is an important addition for evaluating ecological impact. This could help us avoid taking too narrow a perspective in considering the impact on certain species. If the species can be found in other places in the region, then there may be an impact on conservation priorities. In other words, one must not focus too narrowly on just a beach we should consider the influence on the whole region. So I find this approach reasonable. Now, do the public understand this proposed addition? Yes. For the majority of comments received, we find overall support to include at least the whole of Hong Kong in the assessment. Right, this is important because in future, many green groups may believe that no regard should be given to the regional significance. We have the seahorses, Chinese white dolphins, and other species. We should take a holistic view and consider their overall significance and impacts in the region. I support Ms. Carmen Can. This is a necessary addition as the current status goes. There are different interpretations of the scope of an EIA study. In fact, the director has all along championed the broadening of the scope of an EIA study so that you get a higher chance of getting issued an EP. Otherwise, the director of EP may ask for the scope to be widened and for the study to be conducted again. Please continue. Annex 16, page 59 in the English version. The first change, as set out in the PPT, is 1.2. We add ecological information collected through literature review and samplings that are essential for evaluating the ecological impacts in accordance with the criteria laid down in Annex 8. This is also a standardized approach. We have the general principle, and then we explain. This is the introduction, and then we explain what the standardized methodology is. We go further to 3.1a. If a project is likely to result in adverse ecological impacts, and it is unlikely that the practical alternatives are available to minimize the impact, then it is likely that the project will not receive the green light. If we turn to the subsequent paragraphs, please let me check. (5.4.1)A some green groups questioned why we delete the no-go alternative may be the only realistic option. We are of the view that 5.4.1a is a paragraph on mitigation measures. We are not saying no outright to the alternative. Here it says that if the mitigation measure is not a realistic option, it should not be given the go-ahead. Instead, we go back to 3.1a with reference to reasonable alternative, responding to the Green Group's comments. And then 3.1e Sometimes a project may have a very narrow scope, and if there are ecological implications and that tree planting is necessary. To give you an example, if you have limited space, is it possible to plant trees elsewhere? That is why we propose here, apart from on-site mitigation measures, consideration can also be given to off-site mitigation measures for compensatory planting to take place elsewhere. We received supporting comments during the consultation.
嗱呢兩個之外咧，
Besides these 2 points, the major amendments to the ecological assessments is pertain to 5.1.4, 5.1.3 and 4. Now we have added the figure 1, stipulating that we have to complete the 6-month survey period and up to 12 months. Before the amendments, some assessments may be completed in 4 months. And also 5.1.6, upon completion of the baseline surveys, it is only valid for 36 months. To avoid the controversy whether a baseline survey has to be conducted anew. In 5.1.5, there is a reference to Annex Table B or Appendix B. Now, the basic information pertaining to the assessment will be listed in the appendix, including the minimum survey frequency and optimal time for conducting the surveys. So it will standardize the practice. The other are just textual amendments. That's all for Annex 16. Thank you, Director. I have a question on point 3.1. General principle, page 59 in the English version. Now you have drastically truncated the requirements. Now the original version was, if it is proven that there are no other practical and reasonable alternatives available, then there would be approval. And also adequate on-site and off-site mitigation measures are to be employed. Now you are deleting all these provisions. Now you are only saying that unless the impacts can be minimized and or compensated, otherwise the approval will not be given. And it is quite vague. I think mitigation measures refer to 5.4 and other subsequent parts. Now, if a project component tells you that there is no reasonable alternatives available, then you have to consider the extent of the mitigation measures. So what will the standard be? Well, it depends on whether the habitat is a particularly sensitive area. Say, for example, Maipo. That is one of the key conservation areas in Hong Kong. If adverse ecological impact will be caused to these areas, then generally approval will not be given. So for areas where where compensation is possible, say for example replanting of trees and relocating a fish pond to another place beyond the original habitats. Also for migratory birds, these birds would look for food in fish ponds. Now, if the fish pond can be relocated to another area and provide fish supply to migratory birds, that can be a kind of mitigation measure which is off-site. So going back to the previous point, that is, we have to consider the systematic and regional impacts on the ecosystem. That is what we will consider. Ms. Carmen Chan. Thank you, Chairman. Now I'm looking at 3.1 under general principle. I've listened to the director's explanation. Now my observation is, for under the existing EIA process, the project's proponents does not have to prove the necessity of the project, and that there is no alternatives available. The project's proponents only has to prove that the impacts of the project can be minimized or compensated, and then the standard can be met. So we are not making the requirements more difficult, and it seems that we are not removing the no-go alternative. It seems that the director has taken a lot of thought on this. Now 3.2, when we are talking about impact assessment, the government will consider the entire geographical scale of the assessments. So considering ecological assessments, first, the proponents does not have to prove that there is no other alternative. He only has to prove that impacts can be minimized and or compensated within a geographical scale. And one has to prove that mitigation measures will be available. So these are very practical requirements. 3.1 ABC are all mitigation measures. So a no-go alternative does not have to be considered. Yes, it doesn't require us to consider a no-go solution or no-go plan. Having considered all the factors, if we find that it is not feasible, then no approval would be given. That is the objective. Now about about the clause, no other practical and reasonable alternatives are available. Well, 20 years ago, there was a case at the Court of Final Appeal. The proponents said we shouldn't ask the proponents to prove that the project is necessary. We only have to ensure that the projects can meet the environmental standard laid down by the EPD. So that is the judgments of the court. That's why we are deleting the clause in 3.1a. Well, I think you have accumulated experience from the past court cases, and you are translating the experience gained into the amendments to the Technical Memorandum. So from the project proponent's point of view, they only have to satisfy the government on the feasibility of the mitigation measures. If they are unable to convince the government of the effectiveness of the mitigation measures, then no approval will be given. So the proponents does not have to prove conceptual things like the necessity of the projects and so on. So this is the view of Ms. Carmen Can. So you agree with the director. Now concerning Annex 16, any more questions? Director, please continue. Now we go back to Annex 9. I would invite my team to explain Annex 9. Thank you, Chairman. Now, Annex 9, fisheries. Now we will look at Annex 9 and 17 together. Evaluating fisheries impacts. Now, the criteria for evaluating fisheries impacts, not much changes to the English text. Now, I would like to mention the impact on fishing activity under the criteria. We have deleted the reference to high dependence on affected area and also the percentage requirements. Now, according to our experience, a lot of efforts was spent on reaching the percentage. So we just want to standardize the requirements and leaving behind only large number of fishermen or fishing vessels are affected. That's the only criteria. But will that lead to disputes on what constitutes a large number of fishermen or fishing vessels affected? Are there any views on this from the trade? Well, on what constitutes a large number, we have a standard. And also we will provide guided notes on these amendments so as to clarify the requirements with the trade and also the professions. Annex 17. Guidelines for fisheries impact assessments. Now, just like the ecological assessments, we want to align fisheries impact assessments with that one because they are both related to ecology. Now, 3.2, we are standardizing fisheries baseline information. We will require the reports or the assessments to be reviewed and signed by a professional. And also we are specifying clearly that the minimum period of a fisheries baseline should be 6 months and to 12 months. So the trade consider that 6 months, the public considers that 6 months is a sufficient period and 12 months would be even better. So we think it is appropriate to align the duration of a fisheries impact assessment with the ecological impact assessments. Any question on Annex 17? If there are no questions, proceeding to Annex 10. Annex 10, that is landscape and visual impact assessments. Now, the criteria and the guidelines for evaluating landscape and visual impacts, our proposals are supported by the Hong Kong Institute of Landscaping Architects, and also we have updated the criteria for assessments of landscape and visual impacts. Now it would be more standardized than the original text that is acceptable or unacceptable. We are quantifying the extent by using the terms negligible, moderate, and substantial impact. So this is in alignment with international practice. We have also added the criterion of insignificance. Or negligible. So that's it for Annex 10. Any question? Now that's landscape and visual impact evaluation. So it is closely related to Annex 18, page 73 in English. So we are aligning the requirements with the town planning ordinance on landscape and visual impact assessments. That is to avoid duplicated process. So we are proposing the amendments in alignment with the town planning ordinance. Now, point 2 under Annex 18. So we are allowing the proponents to conduct the landscape and visual impact assessments independently or individually. So when a project is proposed, we would require both assessments to be conducted. Now, having gained experience over the past 20 years and having made reference to the TPO, we are allowing the proponents to conduct either the landscape or the visual impact assessments individually. Now, corresponding to that, we are setting out guidelines on when the project's proponents should opt for a landscape or visual impact assessment. So that is Appendix A under Annex 18. Guidelines are given clearly on whether either of the assessments should be conducted or both of the assessments should be conducted. This proposal is also supported by the Hong Kong Institute of Landscaping Architects. They think this is a set of clear guidelines. Now, point 6 to 7 in Annex 18. Now we are adding the term major public viewpoints. So in the past, the scope would cover a lot of viewpoints. So having discussed with the planning department, we think we should align with the town planning ordinance requirements. That is major public viewpoints. So this is the corresponding amendments. So that's about landscape and visual impact assessments. The above mentioned are the major amendments. The other are just textual changes. An enhancement for the Chinese text. Annex 18, any questions? Please continue. Going back to Annex 11. Ms. Clara Yu and Dr. Samuel Chui. Well, not much changes to Annex 11, only textual amendments. So the English version is clean, no changes. So let's continue. Annex 19. So we have covered Annex 12 and the other annexes. So now we are at Annex 19. Annex 19, page 80 on the English version. Now about cultural heritage. Those are mostly textual amendments, not too much of a controversy there. Now, point 3, potential contaminated land issues. Now, in our explanation, in our previous briefing, we have mentioned that Hong Kong's soil content is quite arsenic. So besides the requirements of source management, we are also requiring pathway management and also receptor management. So by adding these two requirements, it would be made clearer on how we can manage the contamination of land. Now, when we proposed this idea to the public, we received support from the public.
Annex 19. Questions from members? No? Let's continue. Ms. Clara Yu. We now move on to Annex 20. We have guidelines for our staff and others on how to read an EIA report. Little change to the English text. Now we want to improve the quality of EIA studies, so item 11, you have this requirement about quality assurance. There are many assessment EIA studies. We insert a requirement. You need authorized professionals to check and sign off those reports. This matters. So you have item 11, quality assurance. When our staff checks the EIA studies, they will look out for the signature of professionals to make sure the study is in order. A question. Relevant professionals or experts. Is there a definition? Who counts as an expert or professional? Thank you. For the EIA process, there are professionals with the qualifications taking part at different stage of the EIA study, drafting the study. This is to ensure quality. An EIA study covers a wide range of topics. So for areas like air quality modeling, noise modeling, we talk to the relevant professional bodies, institutes, and have come up with the accreditations. So in those cases, there are professional qualifications, professionals being those with their qualifications. As for the other areas, we go by the experience. So these professionals have to show that they have experience in the relevant assessment or modeling. Say 5 years or 7 years of experience, we consider those the appropriate kind of professionals. Before they get started with the EIA, they have to provide the relevant information for vetting. In the long run, we want to have different kinds of professionals with the qualifications take part in the EIA process. Annex 20. Any questions from members? No? Let's continue. Annex 21. This has to do with the contents of an environmental monitoring and audit. Again, minor changes in the English text. Now for EM&A, it's a well-developed process, so no need to change the process itself. So in the Chinese text, there are just textual changes. So in Chinese, fixing some of the terms. Questions about Annex 21? No. Now, Annex 22. Relevant authorities for hazard assessment. Very few changes. In the Chinese, we make changes to the term, but no change to the substance. That is the same directors acting as the authorities. The Director of Electrical and Mechanical Services and the Director of Environmental Protection. And then in the notes, gas safety, there's a definition. It refers to gas as defined in the Ordinance. Dangerous Goods Ordinance. we clarify the definition of dangerous goods as defined in the Dangerous Goods Ordinance. So a change to clarify matters. Thank you. On Annex 22, any questions, comments from members? No? So that's it for Annex 22. So now we're done with the scrutiny of the technical memorandum. A question for our legal advisor. In terms of law or in terms of drafting, have you spotted any issues? Thank you, Chairman. Now, apart from some minor drafting issues raised by members, we have gone through the Chinese and English text and they're in order. So the Chinese text and English text have been checked, no major issues. So now the question is, for the TM, we have identified inconsistencies, inaccuracies. We have to arrive at a decision on what to do with it. Now we can either accept or reject the TM as a whole. So can I get a response from the director? I have a list of textual inconsistencies, discrepancies between the Chinese and the English versions, and wording issues in the Chinese text. Maybe there are typos or some other problems. Another kind of issues I have highlighted is phrases that may potentially create legal risks as the TM is in effect, it may give rise to legal challenges. So the question for the director is, you're the one accountable for the TM. For all the inconsistencies, inaccuracies, what's your take, Director? Thank you, Chairman. I thank the members for their comments. These inconsistencies will not affect the exercise of our powers or our vetting of EIA studies. So no change in the substance. Some textual discrepancies are found. 6.1e, we're missing the word adverse. But as I explained, the context has already included that word, so the meaning is there, and also rail noise versus rail traffic noise. We can fix that, but on the whole, these discrepancies will not affect the exercise of the powers by the EPD under the EIA Ordinance. So we propose that members approve this technical memorandum, and then later we will fix these problems in good time to enhance the TM. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the response, Director. Any other comments from members? As I see this, we have gone through the TM with great care and meticulousness for both the changes in the Schedules 2 and 3 and also in the TM. We have gone through the wording with great care, and we have made a number of comments. Members take this matter very seriously. We want to see a better TM. Even if the TM is not meant to be perfect, at least we want to see the TM as a document that is fit for purpose. That's why comments are made for the government to consider. I agree with the director on this. There are some imperfections with the wording. These minor issues will not affect the operation of the TM, but the department will be accountable if legal challenges do arise down the road. The director and the secretary will have to deal with those consequences. The government has the experience with the operation of the EIA ordinance. The director just assured us that the risks are manageable. As we want to see a better version of the TM, we will also want to see this TM can serve the purpose that it's supposed to, and that is shorten the process. That way, we can boost the speed, the efficiency, and the quality. And that's why we need to strike a balance. There's give and take. So I agree with the director. At this point, I want to see if there are other comments from members. We have to arrive at a decision. We're done with the clause-by-clause scrutiny. We have to decide whether we endorse this TM as it is, or do we reject the TM? And there can be no amendment at this point. So let's see if we have comments from members. Dr. Wendy Hong. Thank you, Chairman. I agree with you. And also the remarks of the director. The Chinese version is obviously the translation. You can tell it's obviously translated text because the phrasing is awkward at times and there are inconsistencies in the choice of terms. But I agree with you, Chairman. It's not a problem with something fundamental about the TM. The TM will not affect the operation of Schedules 2 and 3. I also trust the department's expertise and experience over the years. The director has already assured us there will not be major legal risks, so I agree that we can approve this TM. Thank you, Dr. Hong. In an EIA, when you have a major project, consultants are engaged. From what I know, the consultants usually go by the English text. Occasionally, they look at the Chinese text. The English text here is clear. So that's clear. And the director has also assured us. Now, if we have no objections to the TM, we can follow the existing timetable. And then the director and the secretary will have a review of the TM when appropriate and when needed. Amendments will be made to the TM, and then we will have a revised version. We're confident this can work. If we all agreed on this, then let's draw a line here, and that is, we agree that this TM should be endorsed. Now, as for the next step, so we have a timetable. We are done with the scrutiny. The scrutiny period will expire on June 28th. I will report this scrutiny to the House Committee on this Friday, that's June 16th. Now there's a deadline for giving notice, 5 days, 5 clear working days before, then that's June 21st. Now, since we have talked about an amended version, so the question is, when does the amended version have to be tabled, and how will that be tabled? There were some matters arising from the last meeting. There are revised items C2, C3 in Schedule 2. There are also matters arising for follow-up. Now, will be a really tight schedule. To confirm that no further meetings are needed, we need to receive the papers, and then the papers need to be circulated among members. So we have to set a deadline for members to indicate whether further meetings are needed. If we want to do that, and then the chairman will report the work to the House Committee, we have to get all that done. So we need to get the wording of the changes, so that will need to happen by tomorrow, say by 5 p.m. tomorrow. So assuming the papers are submitted and circulated among members and a member requests further amendment, there will be a 3-day notice period. So that will be Thursday. If we do need a further meeting, we can make that happen on Thursday. Normally, we need 3 calendar days to give notice for the next meeting, but the chairman can look at the situation and the need and waive the notice period. But in any case, we have a really tight schedule. Now, the changes aren't too complicated. Members have also made comment. That shouldn't be too tough. So let's crack on with the work. Can you get the reply in tomorrow? Try to get the replies in tomorrow, and then our secretariat will circulate the papers. Let's work together on this. Thank you, Chairman. We will submit the work by tomorrow. Let's crack on. Now, any other business? No other business. So if needed, we will let you know. When we get the papers, we will circulate them and then ask members whether further meetings are needed or whether we accept those changes. And then we can tell what next within 2 days. If there is no other business, I will adjourn the meeting here. Thank you.